Hello, my name is Debbie Boone, and I want to welcome you to my podcast, The Bend, where we explore how successful people navigated the path and emerged in a better place when life threw them an unexpected twist. It's inspired by one of my favorite sayings: the bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you fail to make the curve. These conversations will hopefully help you and inspire you to embrace your personal bend and to flourish. I hope you enjoy it, and if you need help with your own personal navigation and you're in veterinary medicine, please feel free to reach out to me at Debbie Boone to Manage Vets Consulting. Enjoy the bend and be inspired by our wonderful guest. Welcome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of The Bend. I am your host, Debbie Boone, and today I am so happy to have with me a friend I've known for a long time, Dr. Melinda Merck. Now, Melinda has a very unique position in veterinary medicine. She is a forensic veterinarian, and she owns her own company, Veterinary Forensics Consulting. But prior to that, she was the co-chair for WASAVA, Animal Wellness and Welfare Committee. She is a past board president of Pride Veterinary Medical Community, course coordinator for Vetfolio. And this is when I met her. She was the president of the North American Veterinary Community. She was on the board of directors. She got her DVM at Michigan State, and she has some very interesting bends in her road that we want to talk about. So Melinda, thanks for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about, were you one of those kids who wanted to be a vet from the time you were conscious of what they were?
Yes, I think I saw it in, when mom collected everything. I think I was in kindergarten. Yeah, there was something, what do you want to be when you grow up? Yeah. And it just was it was always a knowing. It wasn't a challenge, it was just that's what I was going to be.
Uh-huh.
And interesting, certainly in this climate right now. And I told my dad, who only had two daughters, I said, we didn't grow up knowing there was any glass ceilings.
Yeah.
We were completely empowered by him and my mom. Like, of course, so yeah, I knew, but in high school, the guidance counselor told me I couldn't be a vet because I was a woman.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I've been doing this 40 years. And when I first started, I was a part-time receptionist in 1985. I always laugh and tell people, if you weren't born then, just don't even tell me that you weren't. But it's highly likely that you weren't in my audiences. But yeah, there were almost no female veterinarians at that point in time. And as the practice manager, there were really no practice managers that were female.
No,
They were,
yeah.
not even in like the VHMA. And I think I joined the Veterinary Hospital Managers Association originally around 1987, 1988. And they laugh and say, you might be our oldest member. I went, just shut up. I don't know that. But even then, it was Mark Opperman, who just passed away, Ralph Dukes, Roger Cummings. They were the ones who were writing everything about
Right.
how you practiced, the management side of veterinary medicine. And so that glass ceiling kind of thing, I grew up in business. And I'm like you, I didn't know I couldn't. I just did,
Right.
I
Right.
just said, I'm going to go do it. And I did.
Yeah.
But I too wanted to be a veterinarian. So that's my animal science background. And 4 years of school, I went, screw this. I'm not doing it anymore.
You probably took a good bend. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. So did you do the, kind of traditional, I got out of vet school, went to work in practice role?
Yeah, I did. It was, I just was like, I was talking to somebody whose daughter wants to be going to vet school, and she's getting a little frustrated. And in the undergrad stuff. And I said, just hang in there. And I remember one of the challenges, I was like, I hated math.
Oh God, me too.
I hated math. I'm a visual learner, right? As most of us are. And so I took courses during the summer that sucked up a lot of time, right? Just because I could take smaller credit hours. Usually the professors were only taught half the time, so you didn't have a final over everything. But I did that so I could then focus, on what I naturally loved and like to learn.
Hmm.
But yeah, so I did, and I got in after 2 years of undergrad. I was like, I want to get this done, and I tried to take all the advanced stuff, and yeah, I got in. And while I was in high school, I worked for a vet,
Hmm.
and then in my senior year of vet school, my last fourth year, I went back to work, help out during that senior year because he had cancer. And yeah, I went straight
Yeah.
into small animal practice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was going to ask you, I feel like in today's world that we have a lot of people going into veterinary medicine who weren't really prepared for the real world of it.
agreed.
And it is, I told Courtney Campbell the other day, I said, we are a people business who happens to sell veterinary care. And we don't go into it thinking that. We go into it
No.
thinking it's about the medicine and I'll deal with the humans because I don't really want to. But I feel like there's an unrealistic expectation of what it is. And so you working in practice, do you feel like that set you up to really understand what the deal was before you got
Yeah.
into school?
Yeah, I
Hmm.
do. I think being exposed to all different aspects, I was volunteering, and then I got hired because I would clean underneath the surgery table.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I was just like, wait, that's, dust to me is disease. So
I
I
love
was
it.
a little obsessive about that.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I agree. I also thought that having the accelerated program to get in after 2 years was fine, that I could do that, but I was a little young,
Uh-huh.
I think that making that 4 year, yes,
Hmm.
2 more years would have been better to
Hmm.
be more well-rounded. But, a lot of veterinarians are introverts, and they are
Yes.
focused on studying and their grades. And I played sports. I played all 3 seasons. I played all summer, in school, social, very active. But I'm one of those introverts that I need to have that downtime, right?
Hmm.
I need to
Hmm.
be home. Charlotte Lacroix and I talk about this, like
Yeah.
we can be gregarious, but then we want our away from
Right.
all of you time, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so I think I've said that is the biggest awakening when they get out of vet school, is how much people work it is,
Hmm.
and we're not doing them any favors in not encouraging or in getting that screened out, or at least developing
Yeah.
that to the point where they can engage and
Hmm.
connect with their clients, because
Yes.
we have to have the clients to get what we want done with the
100%.
pets, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
100%. And you've got to be good. One of the things that I've kind of taught under the radar is sales skills. And if you say you're going to sell to a veterinarian, they're like those fainting goats that just fall over dead, right? But the truth of the matter is, if you're not a good salesperson, you're not showing that client the value of the work, and they will say no. And then you
Right.
don't get to do your work. So we have to really be good at talking to people, finding out the need that they have and how your work can fill that need, which the need is, I want my pet to be healthy. And here's
Yeah.
how we can solve the problem. But we tend to come at it in a different direction. So I know that they teach communication more than they did, probably when you went to school, definitely when I went to school. But it's still, what, 2 weeks? It's not enough to manage
No.
what's happening out there.
And I think it's more simple. To me, it came natural. I never thought of it as sales. It was always advocacy.
Hmm.
This I am advocated. I don't say, do you want to, or what do you want to do? Because they are qualified to make that
No,
decision.
no, absolutely
So
not.
it's my job is to say, this is what we need to do.
Uh,
We have multiple pathways, right,
uh,
to adjust to whatever their financial constraints or
mhm,
belief system is. So that's where you have to listen
mhm.
and navigate. But you're advocating because that patient has no voice, right?
No.
So if this is what we need to do, and if we can't, we can stair step it, right? We can do this, and then we'll see how over the next few days. And if that doesn't work, then we're going to go to the next diagnostic. So
Mhm.
you're not losing, and then they still have some control and
Right.
autonomy a little bit. But that's the sales. It's really the advocacy.
Yeah.
And then I would tell them, hey, I'm going to these conferences, right? And this is the latest. And this is why you come to me, is
Right.
because I'm trying to learn and give you everything, right?
Mhm.
And make them, if they just came in my practice, and I had a cat practice, right? So it
Uh,
was more selective
mhm.
and screening. But if they just came in for a rabies shot, I'm like, I'm not your vet.
Mhm.
If you don't want to hear from me what all this stuff about nutrition, about behavior, about
Mhm.
declawing, about, then please don't waste my time and
Right.
you can go down the street. I would
Yeah.
tell them that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Well,
Yeah.
we talk a lot in my world, the management world, about branding your practice. And
Mhm.
that's what you're talking about. You're saying, this is my brand. I am the cat guru. And if you want a cat guru who really gives, high quality of life to the cat, then I'm your girl. But otherwise, if you want, the outside cat that, comes in straggling half dead with, that you don't really care about. It's like the cat in the barn that may be there, may not be, or a coyote ate it. Then, I'm not for you. Just go to Tractor Supply and get in
If
the
they don't
parking
want to
lot and
do
have
it. But
at it.
even then, yeah, no,
Yeah,
I'm actually going to say, give me the cat and I'll find a home
yeah.
for it. That
Give
was
me the
me.
cat.
Yeah.
Give me the
Yeah.
cat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
I,
I think something
yeah,
else that we've lost, if I can
sure.
mention, is my philosophy. Of course, this was my practice and my culture. No patient walked out without being treated
Uh-huh.
because of financial anything. We
Mm-hmm.
would find a way. Of course,
Find
I
a way.
worked shelter, with shelters.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the best stories was this elderly woman came in with a cat that she had been feeding as a stray and would go in and out of her house. And she saw him eat the drapery cord, like six
Oh,
feet of drapery cord.
oh,
And it's end of night. And she's like, and she's crying. She said, my husband will not let me spend $1, and I'm like, we're not going to let the cat die.
uh-huh.
Everybody stayed late. We did the surgery. And after that, and people, I don't understand this concept. We all went home feeling great,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And it took us another hour and a half, whatever. But after that, she didn't go around and say, hey, Dr. Merck's going to give you all free health care
Uh-huh.
for your cats. She came in every year after that with her husband, and that cat got vaccinated
Uh-huh.
and all his annuals, right?
Uh-huh.
So it was helping someone in need, that this was obviously, there was an emotional connection
Mm-hmm.
with this cat. And so I think we need to do that. We
Uh-huh.
need to have that altruistic
Mm-hmm.
aspects of our practice, because it benefits your entire staff and your community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's in every practice that I work with as a consultant, I always talk about having an angel fund and
Yeah.
fundraising and having the cushion that you can do that kind of stuff, when people need help, if they have just gotten tapped out. I was really lucky in my practice that I had a wealthy client who said, Deb, if you get a case like that, and it didn't happen much, we were very country club kind of practice, call me and let me know. And I mean, there was nothing for me to call him up and say, hey, I've got this case and the people have spent everything that they can. And if we had another $500, we could get this
Yeah.
puppy, healthy. And he'd go
Yeah.
put it on my credit card and we do it.
Yeah.
So not everybody's that lucky, but we can build that luck into systemizing how we can help. And I feel like you made a really good point is we can help, we can figure it out. There are
Mhm.
enough tools out there in the world that we can use to be able to help. And even if we can't, if you can't afford anything, maybe they can afford it this time, right? But that doesn't mean 2 years from now they can't afford it because
Right.
their circumstances change. So
Right.
I'm a figure it out kind of gal. I think that's what good
Yeah.
managers do anyway. Is there's always
Yeah.
looking solutions to
Yeah.
problems and trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
So Melinda, I'm really curious as to how you went over into forensics because it's a unique niche of veterinary medicine, and I wanted to talk to you today about it because I feel like people don't know about it, but we were just talking about it before we started to record. There's probably a forensic veterinarian in every state that somehow works with the court system, and
Yes.
this whole thing came about because somebody commented and said somebody is the only forensic veterinarian. I'm like, hold the fort. Wait a minute. I know forensic veterinarians. So I wanted to kind of get you to enlighten the audience a little bit about forensic veterinary medicine.
Yes. It was it's one of those, before I got on today, I was like, how am I going to describe how I got here or there? I believe in, my whole life has had a hand of God or something directing it. And and paying attention to it, right, and due diligence. But anytime I would have a case come in, cross my path in practice, or I volunteered at shelters, I helped start a no-kill cat shelter. But if I saw cases of abuse, or clients or good Samaritans would bring them in, I would report them.
Mm.
And even before we had laws to support. And so because that was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you're from Texas, right?
I'm from
Right.
North Carolina,
North Carolina. All
Yeah.
right. So that whole, take care of and step up, kind of do the right thing, has always been a guiding
Mm-hmm.
value. So when I would see cases, I would do that. And then, so, and full disclosure, Scooby-Doo favorite, Nancy Drew, read all those, watched, for those that are old enough, Quincy. I wanted to be Quincy. I
Oh,
wanted
yeah.
to live on a sailboat with my golden retriever and a cat and solve mysteries. And I watched all the Forensic Files. That was it was court TV, and now it's something else now.
Mhm.
But I love mysteries. And veterinary medicine is mystery solving, right?
Oh,
It's
absolutely. Yeah.
totally puzzles with very, sometimes true clues and sometimes red herrings. So I naturally gravitated to that. When there was a group in, well, first there was a horrible case in Atlanta where a law student was mutilating cats, and hit the news, and that was the motivating force for us to get a felony law in Georgia. And so I was in practice in Atlanta, and a group called Georgia Legal Professionals for Animals formed during that following year. And their mandate was to provide free conferences, free education to law enforcement and prosecutors. That was their goal, because a year into it, no one was still investigating or prosecuting.
Mm-hmm.
Again, no one knows what to do with these. They don't know what to do at crime scenes. They don't know what animals do. How
Yeah.
many species do we have? Do they fall under the law? All these questions. So a client of mine was part of the group. She's like, you need to join this group. So that's how it started. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, we want you to speak on what you would look for at a crime scene. Well, because I had watched all the TV shows and read all the books, I was like, well, I know what I would look for. I know I've worked with, officers already on cases, but we only have misdemeanor. So I'm like, okay, I'll just do some research. And I went to go find something, and there was nothing. I
Oh,
thought, certainly there's a book out.
uh-huh.
Certainly it was only wildlife forensics, because of federal crimes.
Right.
And there was only the one series of papers published in the UK called the battered pet syndrome, and that was it.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So I had a gunshot case. I'd had another case. I had made connections with the medical examiners already, because
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I know you're not supposed to scratch the outside rifling marks on a bullet, because I watch Forensic
Uh-huh.
Files. How do I retrieve it? How do I write a report? So
Uh-huh.
they're like, yeah. So the GBI, so the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, I called them, and they were all animal lovers, and the head medical examiner's like, hey, I'll call you whenever we have a suspected homicide and a suspicious death, and you can come down and watch. Well, it turns out consistently the homicides occurred on Friday and Saturday.
Uh-huh.
It was weird, and they think it's because of paychecks or
Yeah.
end
People
of
get out and
end
get
of
rowdy.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
it. It was very interesting. So that's how I started to learn. And I would talk with medical legal death investigators. They were highly supportive of anything, because I needed to know human forensics,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I know animals, but
Yeah.
so I'll apply the animal filter on whatever, they say for animals. And so that's how it started. And the first time I ever spoke was to a bunch of detectives in Douglas, Georgia. And they were like, no engagement,
Uh-huh.
no smiling, no nodding heads. They were like robots, because they're cops,
Oh
right?
my gosh, that would be
So
awful. As a
so I
speaker.
thought I bombed, right? And then afterwards, and this is where I learned.
Yeah.
Afterwards, they all came up.
Uh-huh.
and talked and had questions, but they
Uh-huh.
were not going to ask a question in front of their colleagues because they
Uh-huh.
don't want to look stupid.
Uh-huh.
So that's why now when I train law enforcement, I get them engaged early on,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, I get them on. But that was my first speaking, and then it grew. Then
Yeah.
it grew from there. I started watching all the forensic files as part of research, taking human forensic courses, crime scene investigation. We had a huge issue. Crime scene, they got better things to do, I know, but even if they did respond to our scenes, they barely took photos. They didn't know what was important.
Mm-hmm.
um, they certainly didn't know bloodstain pattern analysis and what that meant and how to nothing.
Yeah.
They probably didn't even know the same reagents would work with animal
Yeah.
bloods as human. So I realized, I'm like, okay, I need to know crime scene and I
Mhm.
need to know that process because we're not going to get the support. And worked with a cruelty investigator in Gwinnett County, Georgia, Joey Brooks, who used to be a crime scene investigator. And so we together would figure things out. Can we get DNA from this? Could we get fingerprints from, you know, the plastic bag the puppies were in? And we just talk it through and figure it out. And so that's how it turned.
Uh-huh.
And then, yeah, long story short, through different people hearing about me, or I go to conferences, and then someone got asked to finish off a book that was in progress for HSUS. And then I got asked to write a book by Wiley Publishing.
Mhm.
And I realized if we don't have something on the shelf to reference, the vets aren't going to touch it,
No, no.
right?
Well, they have no idea
It,
where to go with anything.
right.
I can tell you that, the last practice that I managed, I worked for Joe Canarney, and we managed the shelter for the county, and we got involved in cruelty cases. There was a lot of dog fighting up there. So and there was a whole cockfighting ring that we had to deal with. And, those were evidence. And we had 7 fighting cocks in our
Yeah.
boarding kennel for 2 months waiting for the court case. So every morning it was like, and all
Oh,
these
yeah.
roosters are in there, but they were also very dangerous to deal with. But you couldn't do anything with them until the court case came through. But
Yep.
yeah, what do you do with those things and the
Live
cruelty cases that
evidence.
you
Yeah,
see?
live
Yeah.
evidence. And if the laws aren't allowing for them to go into foster or be euthanized,
Hmm.
in some cases, then we are committing cruelty by holding them
Just,
for too long.
hmm.
And so early days, right, we didn't have all that stuff. We didn't
Hmm.
have the bond to force them to pay for the care
Uh-huh.
for the defendants. We had to get laws to catch up. We had to get prosecutors. We got animal law being taught,
Hmm.
and then we had to have judges educated
Hmm.
because they were like, "What do we do?
Right.
What do we do with these? What's their risk of reoffending?" Because
Hmm.
that's sometimes, how they decide how to, in the range of sentencing, what to do.
Do
Defense
you
attorneys going, "What do I got?"
So, Melinda, do you think like the Michael Vick case brought a lot of this? Because I was working with the shelter at that time, and it was like a eye-opening to the
It,
public what
mhm,
was going on,
mhm.
behind the scenes. Because I don't think people are aware of the
Yeah.
stuff that happens, and especially if you're involved in shelter medicine or working in any way with animal control, you're seeing the worst of the worst. And I said, this is probably the most thankless job I ever had in my life, but
Mhm.
I felt like I was able to do some of the most good when
Right.
I was working with trying to get things better in that shelter environment. And the public has changed their attitude towards animals too. You grew up in Texas, I grew up in North Carolina. Livestock mentality was what was running rampant. I can remember talking about animal cruelty. When I started working in the animal hospital, I don't even know how I found this out. It was really early, like early in my management career. And I found out that there was some man out in the country who would take cats and strap them to a tree and castrate them and then turn around and let them go. And people were paying him to do this. His father had been a veterinarian, and I guess they assumed he knew what he was doing, but no pain control, no any kind of anything, just strapped him to a tree as they were hanging on, tied a rope onto him and neutered them and turned them loose. Now, of course, I grew up going to NC State, animal science, pre-vet curriculum, and we went into the livestock barns, and I learned how to freeze brand cows, drench sheep, and then watch them castrate piglets, which is very
Piglets.
much the same deal.
I
They just
know.
strap them
I
down
know.
and there you go.
I
So
know.
there's that livestock mentality that's out there. And I feel like Temple Grandin has done a great deal of shining light and improving the
Mhm.
handling of livestock. But you're right. There was no laws. These were people's personal property, not considered sentient beings, and the laws have are moving in the right direction. And I know
Yeah.
a lot of veterinarians are a little concerned about it because they're like, oh, now, we're sentient beings. Now, are we going to be charged with cruelty and all this kind of stuff? But no, not if you're doing your job any more than you're a
No,
pediatrician.
every
And
cruel, and that's
yeah.
so I think we can't have it both ways as
Hmm.
veterinarians. That sentient, they are absolutely sentient beings.
Hmm.
We know this. We are
Hmm.
advocating for it.
Of
We're
course.
advocating for pain control.
Yeah.
We know, we see them choosing, behaviors of choosing joy and, fun and happy versus negative,
Uh-huh.
right? All these qualifications that make them sentient beings. So what, right?
Hmm.
We want them to be valued.
Hmm.
But then you're worried about being sued. Number one, cruelty, all cruelty laws exempt for medical,
Uh-huh.
right? For veterinary care. You
Hmm.
be abusive in it, that's a whole different
Sure.
story, right?
Hmm.
In your handling of animals. But there's still, we want their value to be high. We want them to be valued members of the household or whatever it is.
Hmm.
So we can't have it both ways. And so your insurance premiums may go up.
Hmm.
Um, a- so what?
Yeah.
They are valued,
Hmm.
and they're valued so much that we have put people away for animal cruelty for as long as like 70 years.
Hmm.
So the legislature, the people have spoken, and that they recognize, and I certainly legislature doesn't always represent the people, but for
Hmm.
on animals, they know that when people commit violent, despicable acts on animals
Hmm.
and or just hurt them for fun, and
Hmm.
um, they know how offensive and what a threat
Hmm.
that is to society,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It's the whole
'Cause-
Gandhi saying on how we
yeah,
treat our animals,
is
whether it's horses, cows, or whatever. It speaks to the person. And so when you talk about the Michael Vick thing, I have a PowerPoint. I talk about key moments that changed, in this field, and that was one of them.
hmm.
That it blew our socks off
Hmm.
on that. It was the topic of conversation on all the news channels every single night because I
Yeah.
watched. And
Yeah.
then the U.S. attorney and the USDA investigator, OIG investigator, we would all get on the phone every night and
Hmm.
go, it's on again. It's, we'd be texting, and because we couldn't talk to anybody else
Yeah.
because no one knew I was working the case.
Oh gosh, yeah,
And
people were so outraged about it. I remember
yeah,
personally saying, and I think it was because we have this perception that this is kind of shady, criminal, underground, trash kind of people who were doing this. And here you had this man who had more money than he knew what to do with, doing it
right.
for fun.
He
And,
was the highest paid quarterback in the NFL at the time.
oh,
It was 300 and something thousand dollars. I mean, it was just, or no, 300, I don't know, 300 something million dollars.
probably
So,
million. Yeah.
yeah, it was million, which he lost. But that was the big thing, is that it can be anybody. And
Mm-hmm.
so it shined a light on animal cruelty in
Hmm.
general, animal fighting. Um, and it also did something else to our courts and to law enforcement, for law enforcement, because those that investigate animal cruelty on law enforcement side could get harassed. Like, why are you wasting time? Or it's the officer that no one wants to work with, they assign to the animal case
Hmm.
unit, because they think he or she's not good enough to work other types of
Hmm.
crimes. So this changed it
Hmm.
because what it can establish, at least for the animal fighting, is like a RICO statute, which
Hmm.
is a criminal enterprise crossing state lines, which then triggers asset forfeiture, which is why they all love the drug cases, because they get the cars, they get the houses, they get the boats, and they get the money,
Hmm.
right? So that was we had an award we won for the case through well, I've got it right here. Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, National Leadership. So it was all Secret Service was around. It was all these people who'd taken down international gangs, cartels, and whatever. And when we got our award, you could see the light bulbs going off in that room. There was
Uh,
thousands of people in there. They're
uh-huh.
like, wait, you got $1 million asset forfeiture on dogfighting?
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that really then they're like DEA was like, okay, the
Yeah.
feds
We'll
were
pay
like,
attention
okay,
to it. Yeah.
we're
We'll pay
gonna,
attention
yeah,
to it.
this could be good for us. And
Yeah.
the prosecutors, same thing. So it
Yeah.
was a big all around, like this is, and then the judge in the case, the federal judge owned Bichon's, and
Oh,
he was like, what? So
I
I'm
love it.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I remember it so well because I was working in practice at that time and it was like, yeah, and it finally somebody's paying attention to this because we were
Mhm.
seeing it. But one of the things that you said just made me think about something. None of our animal control officers owned animals. And then we had to really work. It was kind of a strange situation.
Mhm.
We were kind of subleasing space to the county because they didn't have a shelter when I started working there. And so the animal control people would just come and, bring animals. We had a gas chamber that we immediately got rid of not too long after I started there and started euthanizing animals individually, when their time was up, forced the county to get funding for a new shelter. But those kind of things we were dealing with. But we had animal control officer bringing in like 6-week-old kittens on a catch pole. And we're like, seriously, dude, you weigh 300 pounds and you're bringing this 2-ounce kitten
Wow.
in like this. So we had to work to educate because I actually took one of my licensed technicians and put her in charge of the shelter. And so we worked to try to educate animal control too. But I feel like you're right. It was kind of like the people that they couldn't do the other sheriff work, so they put him up there. Now, fortunately for me, Sheriff Sam Page had been a canine handler in the Marines, and he was a big
Oh,
advocate for animals, and so he was really going after like the pit bull fighting and all that kind of stuff. But it was an interesting world for me to move into that from coming from this country club sheep
sure,
practice that I
sure.
had managed to practice in rural North Carolina, even though it was an amazing practice, but it was every spectrum. And I said, one of the things I learned there more than anything was probably being able to manage all echelons of human socioeconomic levels because you had,
Yeah.
the people who were coming to get their dogs out of the animal shelter. I laughed and I told Jan Bellows one day we were doing a Greenies advisory council and they were talking about, Jan was talking about staging the dental care and coming in and doing half the mouth cascade and the other half. And I said, Jan, I have people who are coming in and you want me to do them all this stuff. I said, they don't even have any teeth themselves. This is my clients with any teeth. And so, you know, you just got to be realistic about who's walking in the door. But you know what? Still, people who have no teeth understand pain and dental
Sure.
pain, and you can talk to them about stuff. We just can't judge if they won't. But I feel
Yeah.
like this is so fascinating that how this all played out. And I really didn't even know that you worked on the Michael Vick case. So now I'm even more excited to have
Oh,
this.
you didn't know?
No,
Oh
I
my
didn't
gosh.
know that this was. Now I'm
Oh,
getting inside
girlfriend. Oh
scoop
my
on
gosh.
that. Oh my
That
gosh.
was that was a that was a 8 month thing we kept under wraps. At the time I was working for the ASPCA and the board of directors wanted to announce it. I'm like, you announce it, and I quit.
Yeah.
Right? Because this was a federal, they didn't want the focus on me, on what I had done. They wanted it. The Mike Gill, who was the lead U.S. attorney on it, was brilliant um, in how he laid it all out and boxed them in on his indictment. We've done seminars on this case. It's just amazing. But at the end of the year after, because he got sentenced, it was December, something like that, because he was the last one to take a plea and then he failed his pre-sentencing stuff. But I had designed a crime scene unit because I'm like, I need a place that I can examine animals. I had actually designed it before I went to work for the ASPCA, and then we found a funder to do it. So I also had worked with the show CSI in the past on advising on cases, on stuff, forensic stuff for their shows. And they came to us about doing a dogfighting one. So I was advising about that. So that week, Vic got sentenced. The very next day or the day after, the very next day, we were on the Today Show unveiling the CSI unit. That was on a Tuesday. So sentencing Monday, Tuesday. And on Thursday, the CSI episode aired about
Oh my
dogfighting.
gosh. Oh wow.
So it was like the perfect ending of everything,
Yeah.
and yeah, so that was an amazing time,
Mhm.
right? And I told him it'll pay off in the end, but if we violate the confidentiality of the federal
Mm,
government, I'm
mm.
out,
Yeah.
um so that was tough navigating. But
Yeah.
another, Ben, when you talk about chemo, the other thing that's happened is the FBI's become engaged on behavioral connections, the
Yes.
BAU.
Yes.
um so that's huge. They're tracking everything, including just neglect, but
Yeah.
every form of animal cruelty. Um,
Because it's
so we've
leading
got,
over into human. I mean,
right.
there's a lot
Yeah,
of evidence now that says if you start out in the sociopathic behavior with animals that it moves on into human sociopathic behavior.
exactly. Child abuse linked with
Mm-hmm.
sexual abuse of animals, domestic violence linked with sexual abuse of animals and all other types of
Yeah.
animal cruelty.
Yeah.
Um, and that awareness, the National Sheriff's Association came out and said it is important um, to investigate animal cruelty. So they've given permission
Mm-hmm.
for law enforcement to work these cases
Mm-hmm.
because of the
Yeah.
interconnectedness, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so that has been huge. That has been
Mm-hmm.
huge,
Mm-hmm.
especially on the domestic violence side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Because and you know, and the other part of that too is so many people won't leave their partner because they abuse the animals and they can't take their animals to shelters. So I think that's another part of this puzzle is that shelters are realizing they need to have shelter for animals too when abuse victims are seeking solace from, you know, an abusive spouse or a abusive partner because the threat is I'll harm your animal if you leave.
Exactly.
If you
And
leave.
the statistics are really, and this is where veterinarians need to become involved in their community.
Mhm.
I just did, it was my goal with Wasava. It got postponed with pandemic and we finally did it in Portugal. But we did I wanted to do a workshop
Mhm.
on these kinds of foster or co-housing programs for domestic violence shelters, um, and how the veterinary community has to play a role or can play a
Mhm.
role in that. And my point was, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already been done in
Mhm.
many different countries, and with different templates from Los Angeles SPCA to Toronto, that was led by the Ontario VMA, to the UK,
Mhm.
and so forth. So we did a workshop
Mhm.
on that, on how it could all be done.
Mhm.
Um, but 65 up to between 45 and 65, depend on the paper. 65% of the homes with pets that have are experiencing domestic violence, 45 to 65% reported they would delay or not leave if they didn't have a place
They didn't could
to
take
go
their
with their
pet.
pet.
Mhm.
So being in a domestic violence situation and having a pet is a risk factor.
Mhm.
They're going to stay, they could be killed or
Mhm.
further injury for both the humans and the pets and the
Mhm.
children. But at the time, less than 10% of shelters in the US and Canada had pet programs.
Mhm.
So that is where we're seeing it's starting
Mhm.
to shift.
Mhm.
It's what I did here in Atlanta. I mean, sorry, in Austin, was got to work with our local shelter, and they just internally would just call, a coworker, like, can you take this cat? Can you take
Uh-huh.
this dog? So it was a soft, hidden thing.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, we need to make this official. So I
Yeah.
got with the director of the Austin Humane Society, and she's like, we need to do this. So
Mhm.
they're now connected and working together.
Mhm.
So that's huge.
Mhm. Yeah, that's true. That is truly amazing. I mean, we animals are the lifeline for these people. Sometimes the only kindness that they have is coming from that pet, and so they're so attached to them, they're not going to abandon them. And we see the same thing in disasters and hurricanes and fires and stuff. People are not going to abandon their animals. And I feel like the country as a whole is seeing the value of animals and acknowledging that, loudly, so to speak. I really think it can make veterinary medicine a little harder because there's such an emotional attachment to animals now compared to what there was 40 years ago when I started. But it's also great because I feel like, everybody who works in veterinary medicine totally gets it. And people who have never had a pet, like, are you crazy? You don't get it. But then all they do is get one, and oh my gosh, they're just foolish over them, just like we are. But I feel like that's as a society, we have had an epiphany about the value of animals. And it's not only for just because they are unconditional love and they actually get us off our butt and get us walking, which is always
Right.
good for our health, good for our blood pressure. And there's so many. I'm doing some work with Habry, and one of the things we talk about, that human animal
Hmm.
bond, and truly the physical medical benefits of having a pet are very strong.
Yeah.
And loneliness is a huge problem in the United
Yes.
States. And I think it got even worse after the pandemic. And how many people had those pets to come home for or be with all during
Right.
the pandemic? I want to touch base on that. I know we don't have about 10 minutes left to go, but you've had a big wrinkle in the pandemic because the
Mhm.
courts were shut down. And here you were. I mean, you're this is my job. And in veterinary medicine, now what do you do? Because we were kind of worried there for a minute in all veterinary medicine until we figured out that we were essential, thank goodness. And then it got crazy.
Yeah.
But you went to work at a grocery store, right?
Yeah. It was one, I knew it was coming,
Uh-huh.
right? I'm like, any veterinarian that knows anything about coronavirus, I was like, oh crap.
Uh-huh.
Right. And I was watching, it was in November, and I was like, oh, and in January, before it ever came here, I started stocking up on toilet paper and
Ah,
paper, paper towel. I was like, oh, I have a feeling, and I was up in New York in March, and they wanted me to come and speak, and then they wanted me to come help at their legislative session, and there were thousands of people, and it was the day of the anti-vaxxers, and I kept going to the bathroom and avoiding people.
ah,
And I wouldn't shake their hands, and
uh-huh.
they were like, "You are being paranoid," right? And right after I left, they had their first case in New York. And my friends are all, "You were right." I'm like, "I know I was
Uh-huh.
right. You should see what it does in cats,
Yeah, yeah,
coronaviruses."
yeah.
So they are not fun if they like to mutate. And so, yeah, I knew it was coming, and I knew everything was going to shut down. And we had a boutique grocery store around the corner, a couple blocks away. And my whole family has worked in grocery sometime, going back to my great grandfather, but I like bagging groceries. I've always liked it. And I was like, I wonder, because I do the consulting and the speaking, all that's part-time after I sold my practice, I just do it. I was like, maybe I'll go see if I had always thought if they would work with my schedule
Uh-huh.
that I can go travel or consult or, go testify. Maybe I could work there. So I went out, I was like, oh, it's coming. And then Amazon announced I applied to Amazon too, and I got that, but I was like, I'm not going to do Amazon. Just to get out,
Uh-huh.
right? And to have some kind of income or whatever. And I got hired, and they're like, you're going to start with cleaning. I'm like, oh, I know, I know virus cleaning, right? So you wipe down the handles like every 30 minutes on
Uh-huh.
all the freezer doors. Um, and then 5 days later, um, see, I got hired as a front end, to work as a cashier and so forth. But then 5 days later, I was an assistant front end manager. And then 9 months later, I was like, I don't, this is why I got out of veterinary medicine. I don't like managing
Uh-huh.
people like that. That was like brought back, flashbacks of all the little stuff and they
Uh-huh.
were young and not showing up. And
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah.
so I worked there during our famous ice storm,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The big
yeah,
Texas freeze.
I was the only one that could get to the store because I could walk there, and I
Ah,
stocked that whole store up, and got it was just crazy times. But then yeah, and then 9 months later I went to work. I like stocking, I like
uh,
organizing, so I did grocery.
will you
And
please
then they
come to
came,
my house, Melinda? My office
I
is a
know,
wreck.
it's crazy. I wasn't coming. So it got me out. I met interesting people. We were right next to the main hospital. I was hearing from the frontline workers, uh, you know, um, everything that was going on.
Mhm,
So I knew trends. We knew death rates. One guy, his wife was a pathologist, worked
mm,
in the morgue. So I would hear from them what was going on.
mhm,
And so it was really interesting. And then the shots came out, right?
mm,
The COVID shots came out, and they're like, "Can you help us with the COVID in pharmacy with
uh-huh,
doing?" I'm like, "I can draw them up." And they were like, "Why don't you come work in pharmacy?" And I'm like, and my aunt and uncle who are pharmacists would kill me. But I was like, "I'm afraid I'll get bored." And they're like, "Why don't you come back here?" So behind the scenes. So I was back there for 45 minutes. I was like, holy crap, we do not know that all they're doing when they look all nice and calm and they don't look like they're doing anything.
uh-huh,
You have no idea. It reminds me so much of a rapid pace veterinary hospital.
uh-huh,
Because there's calls, there's urgencies, there's issues, it's crazy. So I and then so I eventually I went to work for another grocery store. I went to work for HEB, which is only in Texas, and they have a phenomenal culture. And that was the other thing is I didn't like some of the cultures in the
uh-huh,
pharmacies I was working at, and so I screened the different pharmacies, and I was like, oh, I think I like this one, and they hired me, and I got certified to give shots. So I've been vaccinating people. It's
uh-huh,
going to end this at the end of this year. That was an exception for
mhm,
tech pandemic for
mhm,
techs to be able to give it. Um, and there's days that I'm like, why am I doing this? And then I work with a lot of young people, but I also work with people my age. And I had a young girl um, who just transferred to another store in Dallas, and she wrote me this amazing letter of what an influence and inspiration I was to her, right?
uh-huh,
And so I get to impact people.
mhm,
Um, we do a lot of veterinary meds, or
mhm,
we have an ER in our complex,
mhm,
so I can help that way
mhm,
and advise them what drugs we need to keep in stock.
mhm.
But it's been being on the front lines of the pandemic and then after, and then grocery prices going up, and now
Oh,
grocery prices are going down.
mhm,
Um, I just did a thing. I'm like, mine has come down $200 average
oh,
in the last year, but our
oh,
store drops them, they don't price gouge. And so that has been an amazing journey, right? And everybody,
yeah,
sometimes these young guys, like one guy wants to be an architect, he's going to school. He's like, "Why are you here?" Because I'm like, "Yeah, I did a consult this morning," and they're like, "Why are you here?" I'm like, "Because I like you. It
uh-huh,
gets me out of the house.
uh-huh,
I get
yeah,
great benefits. Um, I'm challenged every day.
uh-huh,
Every day I learn something new, or I meet interesting people who are in their 90s to 100,
mhm,
and I hear their stories,
mhm,
and I find it enriching. I
yes,
really do.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's
So,
the thing I miss the most about working in practice every single day because I floated around all the time as the manager, and I spent a lot of time talking to my clients and really talking to them, not just trying to get them in a room and get them back out. And I feel like we're losing so much of that connectivity. We spend way too much time on devices. We spend way too much time hiding from other people,
yeah.
and I feel like we kinda got into that mode during the pandemic, like, where everybody was the devil and they were gonna their germs were gonna kill us. So we were afraid to actually have conversations with people, and now we've gotten into a really bad cycle of
Mhm.
not being able to talk. A couple of years ago, not too right after we kinda came out of the pandemic, I was teaching at AHA, and I did a course on how to talk to strangers. Because I feel
Yeah,
like people don't know how to do it,
they
and it's one
don't.
of my
Yeah.
favorite things, right? And I'm sure
Right.
you like it too. So, I made them do a scavenger hunt, and they had to go and find out, like, who had a hidden tattoo, who had more than 2 kids, who had more than 5 dogs, that kind of stuff, and they had the most fun doing it, and I feel like we look at strangers as if they are, suspicious and evil, and maybe that has a lot to do with the political climate and all the social media crap that we listen to all the time. But I go about my day thinking on the basic premise that people are good, and most people are good. And
Hmm.
even though you have dealt with some of the worst scum of the earth, Do
Mhm.
you feel that same way?
I do. And in pharmacy, we are sometimes seeing people, a lot of them are sick or they have
Mhm,
a loved one that's sick. So we're seeing them under stressful conditions,
mhm,
and and knowing I had a client show up one day and my staff was, they always get pissed right when they're late. And she
mhm.
was like 30 minutes late for her appointment, and we had 30-minute appointments. And I'm like, don't care, we're going to work and whatever. Turns out the reason she was late, she had come home middle of the day to get her cat to bring to the appointment and caught her husband in bed with her best friend.
Oh my
The
gosh.
fact that she even made that appointment, I'm like, you have no idea what's going on with people.
No.
You have no idea. The fact they show up. And the other thing I started doing, and I think this is critical, we need to see people.
Yes.
Most of us just want to be seen. And so if I say to the 96-year-old woman, you look beautiful. I love your earrings.
Yes.
They glow. They
Yes.
were seen. Oh,
Yes.
I really like that tattoo.
Mhm.
Where did, what is that? I'll do that through drive through. I'm like, what is that? What is that on your sleeve?
Uh,
Or um, they being seen is
yes.
it. It makes their day. It
Yes.
doesn't matter about, all I'm saying is like, oh, I really like, or I like,
Mhm.
your hair,
You
or
just
it
pay
doesn't
attention. Pay attention.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, or something on their baseball cap. Thank you for your service.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Colorado. Have you been there?
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
heard it's really nice. Something you
Yes.
can connect with, and has saved me
Uh-huh.
through the pandemic, right? And
Yeah.
doing that. I wrote a blog. I can't do it because of privacy for pharmacy. I had to stop. But when I was in grocery and I wrote that, and there was, I'll get emotional, but it was
Yeah.
Easter, pandemic, and this guy, I mean, and we're all tired. We've worked 10 hours, our feet hurt. We haven't sat down all day in the grocery, and this guy is beating at the door. It's 11:05, and the manager had shut it, and he stands there and he lets him in, and he opens and he's like, what is it? And he said, because the next day was Easter, he said, my wife ordered online, waited in line, and got there, and there was nothing. He said, we have nothing for our kids. We have nothing. Yeah. So we let him in, and he was doubled over crying.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, I'm like, oh, you're gonna get this. What do you got? A boy, girl, whatever. What do
Mhm.
they like? Dinosaurs, whatever. And I helped him, and we did it. And that, I saved the dinosaur. Um, I got one to
Uh,
remind me,
uh-huh.
right,
Yeah.
of that one thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It is, I just finished I wrote that book last year and it's called Hospitality and Healthcare. But it talks about that. It talks about observing people and
Mhm.
making a quick connection. And we think, oh God, I don't have time to make this connection. It takes a long time. But just what you said, it only takes 10 seconds
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
make that observation. And for me, I love to do it like in the TSA line going through in the airport because everybody's all like, ah, in the airport. So I
Hmm.
will look at people and go, well, they're taking their shoes off and they're trying to get dressed in the line. Like, I really love those shoes. Well, and they put them back on and they just kind of strut away because, they got that compliment on their shoes. And I feel like if people understood that it not only makes that person feel good, but it makes you feel good. It truly releases endorphins in your brain and it
It
makes
does.
you happy.
Yeah.
And if you go
Yeah.
through life going, let me give you something, let me like see you, like you said, see you. And then you walk away and go, wasn't that fun? Wasn't that fun?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
standing in line with somebody at the grocery store and some kid does something funny and you look at each other and you kind of laugh and you don't even have to speak. But
Right.
that lifts you up because you made a connection and we are humans and we are meant to work together. We are meant to
Mhm.
connect with each other. And when we don't, we are miserable. And if you want to know why people are mentally unhealthy, it has to do with we stay inside too much. We got to get outside and see some trees and we have to connect with other
Yeah.
people. We really do. And we
Yeah.
can't go through life being afraid of the person who's walking down the street. I'll go back now. Tucker, my Bichon, is what we should all aspire to be. He is extremely social. and he is sure that everybody wants to say hello to him. So we walk the neighborhood, and I'll come back and I'll say something about a neighbor, and my husband will be like, "Who the hell are you talking about?" When Tucker met somebody new, right? So,
Absolutely.
so these are
Yep.
another big advantage of what our pets can do for us is that they can help us make friends in
Yeah,
isolation because we are a very lonely society right now, and
I think
we
so.
are we are struggling to make friends. People have moved a lot, I think, since the pandemic. I know certainly living in South Carolina, lots of people have moved in here. I know Austin is a big mecca. People have moved to Austin like crazy. But that being so, they've come out of their friend group, the people they grew up with, high school friends and stuff like that. So making friends and making connections is something really good that your animals can help you do.
Agreed. And I
Yeah.
think that pandemic, a lot of people are like, I feel safe in my apartment. I'm afraid to, there's a lot of people, we see a lot of people still wearing masks. They're
Yeah.
afraid to get anything anymore. And
Yeah.
we've seen that with Asia, a lot of the cultures there after they've suffered so many different outbreaks of different
Mm-hmm.
things. So you have a lot of fear, a lot
Hmm.
of fear. And then, and then I worry about the kids. I worry about all ages of kids that lost critical time for
Oh
learning
yeah.
some
Yeah.
social interaction and
Social
engagement. And I
interactions
think
there.
pets are going to be, um, animals are going to be a key to that.
Hmm. Yeah,
I
I
agree.
agree. Yeah, I agree. So Melinda, you've taken a lot of different steps, and that I always laugh and say that your path, my path, it was supposed to be linear, right? It was supposed to be vet school and medicine, and it ends up looking more like a drunken sailor on Saturday night. It's kind of
Yeah.
bouncing all over the
It's
place.
like,
But that's okay because from every single one, you learn something very valuable. If you look at it like it's a learning opportunity and something
yeah.
you can take away and bring that to the world. So, what advice would you give somebody who's facing like a critical life decision in their career?
I'm going to go back to one, listen to your gut. If you're unhappy, change it and take the risk. Because
Mhm.
what my dad always drilled into me, what's the worst case?
Yeah.
What's the worst case that
Hmm.
can happen?
Hmm.
Right? If you quit that job, there are number one, there's a shortage of veterinarians. So there's always a veterinary job,
Hmm.
but finding the right culture to wherever you work is key.
Hmm.
Um, if you can change that culture, fine. If not, I'm too old to even try anymore. Like it just needs to be there. Um, but not being afraid, any decision made out of fear is the wrong one.
Right. I agree.
It's
I agree.
always the wrong one,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
you need to reduce the noise, stop the input, and just be and listen, and you'll know what to do. I believe in due diligence when opportunities cross your path. Like I went and did the whole preliminary at Amazon. I was like, gut check, nope,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
It's just knowing you got to have that emotional intelligence to listen to yourself,
Hmm.
and you don't have to be Joe confident on every single thing. I certainly wasn't. I was just like, okay, I'll do this and then I'll try that. And if it doesn't work out,
Yeah.
we'll go
Yeah.
to another, that whole like, winding road.
Mhm.
Um, but that is to not be afraid. Don't make a decision out of fear. Give everything due diligence, stop the noise and go with your gut and it'll work out. And if you do things for the right reason, for the right value,
Mhm.
it will always pay off.
Mhm.
It will always pay off.
Yeah, I agree. Years ago when I would train my staff, we had a big boarding facility, and the week before Christmas, everybody's calling in, "Can you get my dog in?" Well, no, because we, had 4,000 clients and 100 spaces, so the math was
Right.
never going to work. But I recommended other facilities that I had personally gone and checked and made sure they were good. And people go, "You're kidding. You sent them to the competition?" And I went, "My job in veterinary medicine
Mm-hmm.
is to care for animals. And that does not mean just when I make money off of it. It means all the time."
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if I send them someplace safe where they can stay, then that's fine. And it always worked out because what truly happened, and I'm still friends with the lady who owned the boarding kennel. We're still on Facebook and talk today. She said, any unattached pet that didn't have a vet that came to our boarding facility came to you because you had built this relationship with us and we trusted implicitly the skill of your doctors. And so it all works out in the long run. If you go into it with a mentality, not of scarcity, but of abundance, there's plenty for us. There's
Right.
plenty for everyone. We just need
Yeah.
to go out with do good in the world and quit being selfish and self-centered,
Yeah.
and you're going to be much happier. I always remember, and we might have been sitting beside each other. We were at VMX. Michael, oh crap, what's his name? He has Parkinson's. It just went right out of my head. Michael
Oh,
J. Fox.
Michael J. Fox.
Michael J.
Yeah.
Fox was there. I watched him struggle up that set of metal steps onto that stage, stumble, fall, get cut, go right on over to the podium, stand there, uncontrollable muscle movements, bleeding hands, and say, don't feel sorry for yourself. If you want to be happy, go do good for somebody else. And I will
Mhm.
never forget it as long as I live. And I thought, if he can say that, then there is no reason that I can't do that too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's more than one, you know, people are like, how, and I still do the forensic work. I need to clarify that. I
Yeah.
have I have a conference call after this.
Mhm.
Um, I still do that, but it is dark work.
Yes.
And so this has given me lightness,
Yeah.
right? To balance that.
Hmm.
I got this
Yeah.
crazy thing here um, that makes me laugh and aggravates me. But it makes me come out of myself and be present for others,
Hmm.
right? In more of a positive way. And so I think you can piecemeal, it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
You can go back to school.
Hmm.
I'm taking painting lessons.
Well, yeah. So you have some hidden talents. I saw you some of the because we're in the Vet Art Now
Oh,
group
yeah,
on
yeah, yeah.
Facebook. Yeah,
Mhm.
I haven't painted anything in so long, but back in the day, I used to paint portraits of animals and children, and get paid for it. But I don't have time now. But artsy stuff, and so you just started painting and doing some like kind of what do you call it? String? What do
It's flow
like?
painting, and then you can drag things in.
Mhm.
I live in a 55 and older community,
Mhm.
and that has an amazing culture. I also screen this one. But like we play water volleyball. They were doing it one day a week. I used to play volleyball.
Ah,
So I kind of scared them with spiking, and it depends on who's the other side. I got to watch the age group I'm playing
uh-huh.
with. But now we're doing it 2 days a week. And but so they had a workshop, and there's several artists who live here, and they're like, why don't we use that for teaching painting? So
Yeah.
she does flow painting. I did something where you drop a paint and then a drop of oil, and then with a straw,
Uh-huh.
and it made it look like
It'll
it'll
start
be
this.
posted soon.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. So it's fun what they've shown, and it's interesting that you can do all the Sudoku. I do needlework. I do a lot of
Mhm.
cross stitching, detailed stuff. Being creative versus doing Sudoku or crosswords or
Mhm.
whatever. That the create for combating brain
Mhm.
degeneration, it's the creative.
Mhm.
Being creative rebuilds the brain cells.
Yes.
The other keeps your brain active, but being creative is what,
Yeah. It
yeah.
actually builds
So
new neural pathways
exactly,
around blocked plaques that are in your
exactly.
brain. Yeah. Yeah. I
Yep.
have a friend who actually died from early onset Alzheimer's. So I've done a lot of reading. And of course, neuroscience is my geek out topic. So I love reading all that kind of stuff. But yeah, and you also are a musician because we have played and sang together.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And then the director here is a musician, so he was giving me one-on-one guitar lessons. So I was finally learning strumming. So I do a little bit of, yeah, I haven't done the keyboards in a while, but we do have the piano.
Yep.
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 Yep. So find your creative path out there in the world and because it's really good for your brain and it gives you that good exercise and activity outside of just, sitting doing word puzzles. Somebody said, I'm surprised you don't do crosswords. I went, I have no patience. I cannot sit and do that. I can think of 5 million other things that I could do that
Yeah.
would be productive, right? I'm just such a workhorse, but I'll go dig in the yard. I have ridiculous amounts of potted plants, and so I'll go out and dig in dirt, and that's my therapy.
That's your
I'm a dirt
therapy.
girl. Yeah. Well, Melinda, it's been a pleasure, and I knew it was going to be great. So, I even learned stuff about you today that I didn't know. So that's very cool. So, audience, thank you again for joining us today on this episode of The Ben. I'm sure that you learned some good stuff too. And I really appreciate your time as my audience. And we're going to have all Melinda's information in the show notes. If you need a forensic veterinarian, she's your girl. And
I'll know when to send you to.
yep,
Yeah.
exactly right. Because there's more than one in this world.
Yes. Yes,
There
there is.
is, there is. So thank you, Melinda, for especially for all the work that you've done to advocate for animals in the court system, because I am so grateful that the stuff that we see now has consequences, because it did not
Mhm.
for many, many years of my career. There were no consequences. And so,
Yes.
yeah, thank goodness for you and for advocates like you who got it done. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're quite welcome.